Hey guys, that's right here, and if you take a look at the challenges tab in game, you'll see that the season 14 global tournament is of course coming up, I believe a day after this video comes out. And as with each month, in today's video I'm going to go over the top 5 decks to run in this current meta that I would recommend you guys play in that global tournament. These are 5 decks that I found consistently succeeding on both high ladder as well as in grand challenges, so I'm very confident that these decks will perform as well as they can. Of course, with each deck, I'm going to go over a quick description of the synergies as well as a game plan of how I would play it, and also I'll leave a deck link in the description for those of you that are interested. But before I get into that, if you could please leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel, that would be greatly appreciated. Also, go check me out on my Instagram and Twitter, links down below, and if you'd like to support me in game, feel free to use code Legendaray in the shop. And with all that out of the way, let's get right into the decks. Number 1. Royal Giant Cycle. Now this deck I can pretty confidently say is straight up the number 1 deck to run in this upcoming meta. This deck is just seen everywhere and is just super duper unstoppable with all of the synergies in this deck. So to break it down, starting off the match with this deck, you can see there's quite a few cycle cards with the Ice Spirit, the Skeletons, and the Logs. So I generally would start off the match cycling one of those. If your opponent really isn't making a move, then you could probably split Skeleton Dragons or something, but generally I would save that Hunter because it is your most versatile defensive unit. And once your opponent plays something in the back, then go ahead and just react to whatever they play. If they play something cheaper, then maybe just play something in that same lane, say a Fisherman or a Hunter, and if they play something heavier, then consider playing that Royal Giant in the opposite lane. This deck is a pretty fast cycle deck, and as with most cycle decks, you're going to be maintaining a rather high and aggressive pressure throughout the entire match because you really don't want your opponents to build up those massive pushes. So in terms of offense, this deck is obviously pretty simple. You go in with that Royal Giant, and depending on what they have to counter, then you can play different units. If they have a singular high hitting unit such as a P.E.K.K.A. or a Hunter, then support that Royal Giant with a Fisherman so that the Fisherman will hook that unit away. Or if your opponent has some sort of splashers, then maybe the Skeleton Dragons or the Hunter will be a much better option. Now the Heal Spirit is also an insanely clutch card in this deck, not only because it'll heal half the health of pretty much every single one of the support units, but it also heals quite a bit of health on that Royal Giant, allowing you to get quite a few extra hits on the tower. Now with that Heal Spirit, you do have to watch out for what your opponent's small spells are, especially if they have the Log. If they do have the Log, then you're gonna want to wait for them to actually use it so that the Log is out of cycle, because otherwise they'll just always have a counter for that Heal Spirit and it's not going to get any value. In terms of defense, this deck is also relatively solid. Fisherman and Hunter can take care of any of those large tanks, and the Hunter and the Baby Dragon can take care of pretty much any of those splash units. All in all, as long as you're staying aggressive and maintaining a high pressure on your opponent, you're going to do just fine. Number 2. Balloon Royal Recruits. Now this is a rather new version of not really Balloon Cycle anymore, but it's a bit of a more expensive Balloon deck variant. With the buff of the Royal Recruits, they're honestly so much more effective, and in this deck can just do so much work. So starting off this match, it's not as cheap, but I would still recommend cycling some of your cards at the start, more specifically the Snowball, the Heal Spirit, or the Minions, just to try and get the game going. After that, you're just gonna have to watch out and play those offenses at the correct time. Now there are 3 main situations that'll cause me to play a balloon on offense. The first is if the opponent's air counters are out of cycle. So if your opponent cycles like a Musketeer or something in the back, then I'll just go ahead and play a balloon in the opposite lane, supported with maybe a Heal Spirit or a Snowball, because I know that the opponent's main air counter is going to be out of hand. The second situation I'll go in with a balloon on offense is if your opponent makes a big commitment in the back. Say if they play down a Giant or a Golem in the back, then just play that balloon opposite lane because you know that they don't have that much elixir in hand. Finally, the third reason I'll play a balloon on offense is on a counter push. So you're going to want to defend and have some surviving units, and then just play a balloon along with all the other units you have heading towards your opponent's tower. Now in terms of defense, this deck has a lot of potential for producing a counter push. First off, the Royal Recruits spawn 7 units across the arena, which is very difficult for troops to kill. The Musketeer can snipe everything away from range, so if you protect her properly, you'll pretty much always have her on a counter push. And the Lumberjack, even if it has a little bit of health, can still be super duper valuable, especially when it dies and spills that rage on the arena. All in all, even though it's a bit of a more expensive deck, you can still be rather aggressive, and just note that this deck is also a type of chip deck. Number 3, the cheese deck, Elixir Golem Barb Hut. Alrighty, so this deck I'm sure you guys are all quite sick of, and I am too, but unfortunately it is one of the best and highest performing decks in this meta, so it's going to unfortunately make this list. So this deck is honestly one of the most brain dead decks that you can play, because I honestly find myself playing better when I'm not really thinking through how I'm playing this deck. Like honestly, it's super weird. The playstyle of this deck goes against everything that you've been taught in Clash Royale. Basically, you're just trying to build up a push like as the first play in the game and just kind of go all in on those pushes because it's just so difficult for your opponents to stop. So starting off the match, I do like to be a little bit more passive by cycling a Barb Barrel or a Heal Spirit, or I'll even go in with a Barb Hut if that is in cycle. Or if I don't have any of those in cycle, or if the opponent really isn't making a move, then I'll just straight up build an Elixir Golem push from the back of my King Tower. Play that Elixir Golem, play that Battle Healer, and go in with those dragons. Honestly, very, very difficult for your opponents to stop, no matter what deck they are using. In terms of defense, this deck is also quite good. The Barb Hut, when played down, does so much tankage and spawns quite a few waves of Barbarians. The Battle Healer is actually quite a tanky unit, and the dragons just can take care of any unit when played properly. However, with this deck, you do really want to focus more on that offense. Now, the one weakness with this deck is obviously with decks that have just so much splash that'll just take care of any of your units, or if they have like Tornado Rocket or something. In that case, what you're going to want to try and do is to play an Elixir Golem in the back and then try and cycle to a second Elixir Golem and then play that opposite lane. This is going to be very, very effective at pretty much nullifying the effectiveness of any splash unit, because splash units can take care of everything in the same lane, but when it comes to dealing with double lane pushes, it honestly does not do that great of a job. Again, just make sure that you play super aggressive, overly aggressive in fact, with this deck, and you're gonna find that you piss a lot of your opponents off. Number 4. 3 Musketeers, Royal Hogs. Now this deck is one that has done quite well over the past couple of metas, because that double lane pressure combined with the fireball bait element of this deck is just super duper effective. In fact, if you take a look at every single unit in this deck, every single unit in this deck is a medium health unit, meaning that not only is it going to be very useful in baiting out fireballs and other medium spells, but it means that the Heal Spirit is going to get value no matter what unit it connects with. Anyways, starting out with this deck, I do like to cycle either the Heal Spirit, the Barb Barrel, or the Royal Ghost, and that'll generally get your opponents to respond with some sort of troop. And after that, again, you can just play more reactively depending on what matchup you are against. More often than not, this deck is going to be a very, very split lane heavy deck. So once you've built up a bit of an elixir advantage, go with those 3 Musketeers in the back, support those 3 Musketeers with an Ice Golem or a Royal Ghost, and then just split those Royal Hogs at the bridge once those 3 Musketeers get there. That's kind of the ideal push with this deck, and then you can just support that push with a Barb Barrel for an extra tank or a Heal Spirit to try and get that connection onto the tower. Again, this deck is all about double lane pressure, so you have to figure out how exactly you want to allocate your units and to which lane you want to play them in order to maximize the effectiveness while minimizing the spell value that your opponents can have. Now, in terms of defense, this deck is also quite effective. Of course, we have those 3 Musketeers that can be quite effective, but they're also quite vulnerable to spells, so I generally won't use them unless I know that their spells are out of cycle or if the opponent just doesn't have a big spell. Alternatively, I'm going to rely more on the Hunter and the Fisherman in order to take care of most of those tanky units. In addition, I'm going to use the Ice Golem and the Royal Ghost to do most of the tanking, and of course the Royal Ghost and the Hunter are going to deal most of the splash damage. Again, this deck, you just really want to hammer in on that double lane pressure, because that is really, really effective at forcing your opponents to overcommit on defenses, allowing you to build up bigger and bigger pushes, snowballing into an overall victory. Number 5. Giant Skeleton Balloon. Now this is honestly my favorite deck out of the 5 because it has the giant skeleton in it, and I mean, I love playing off meta decks, and it's just a joy to see a deck like this kind of rise up in the meta. Now this deck is quite similar to pretty much every single other deck that I've shared today in the fact that it contains both the Hunter, the Fisherman, as well as the Heal Spirit. But aside from that, again, the playstyle of this is going to be rather quick. You do have 3 cycle cards in this deck, in the Skeletons, the Heal Spirit, and the Snowball, so starting off the match, I'll generally cycle those, and if your opponent really doesn't make a move, then you can probably split Skeleton Dragons or go in with a Fisherman in the back. I generally, again, like to save that Hunter because it is the most versatile defensive unit in the deck, and just like the previous Balloon deck, there are 3 cases that I will go in with an offensive Balloon. When your opponent's air counters are out of cycle, when they make a big commitment in the back, or off of a counter push. So counter pushes are honestly quite straightforward with this deck. Obviously you have the tanky giant skeleton, which has the potential to survive a lot of defenses and then provide offensive tankage as well as value in terms of that gigantic bomb. The Hunter and the Fisherman are also really great at just taking out units, then surviving for an additional counter push. The Hunter is actually just a little bit more tanky than an equally leveled Musketeer, so you'll actually find that it survives a lot more interactions than you would think. Now on offense, again, it's quite simple. Just go in with a Balloon, maybe supported with Skeleton Dragons, but more often than not, if your opponent has a ground counter to the Balloon, you're going to want to go in with a Fisherman in order to hook that ground counter out of the way. In addition, you can support that Balloon with a Heal Spirit as well as a Snowball for any of those tiny splashers. All in all, just like the other Balloon deck, even though it's a little bit more on the expensive side, it also has the potential for a very fast cycle, so you're still able to play this deck quite aggressive and quite like a classic Balloon cycle. So there we go. Those are the top 5 decks that I would recommend you guys run in the upcoming global tournament. Again, these decks are very successful on both high ladder and in grand challenges, and I'm sure a lot of players will be running these decks to get a lot of wins in that global tournament. Again, deck links are going to be down in the description for those of you that are interested, but unfortunately guys, that's all I've got time for in today's episode. Huge thanks to all of my channel members. You guys are the absolute G's. If you enjoyed, please leave a like down below as well as a subscription to my channel. And as always, this is Legendaray, and I'm signing off. See you guys next time.